"You now belong to us," said the three tall women who guarded his barn. The sun beat down the dry land as Billy got off his horse in front of the property he had bought. The wind blew between the worn planks of the fence, producing a low moan that echoed across the empty plain. There was something strange about this place, a feeling that rose up my spine like slowly melting ice. The deed in his pocket seemed to weigh more than it should, and the official documents could not shake the impression that he was being watched. The main house was modest, built of wood that time had painted grey. The windows remained closed, despite the sweltering heat, and the front door hung slightly open, creaking with every gust of wind. Billy tied the horse's reins to the nearest pole and walked around the property, surveying what was now his. The corrals were empty, the fences needed repair, and the water pump made a strange noise when he tested it. It was then that he saw the barn. The building stood imposingly at the back of the property, its faded red walls contrasting with the cloudless sky. It was bigger than he expected, taller too, with a tower of hay that stretched out like a finger pointing to infinity. Billy approached slowly, noticing that the hinges of the main doors were well maintained, unlike the rest of the farm that showed signs of abandonment. When he pulled the heavy door, it opened without resistance. The sunlight cut through the darkness inside like a blade, revealing a wide and uncluttered space. Bales of hay were stacked with military precision, tools hung from hooks on the walls, and the dirt floor was carefully swept. The air inside the barn was cool, a marked difference from the warmth of his. Billy took a few steps inside, his eyes adjusting to the dim light. That's when he saw them. Three women stood at the back of the barn, tall and silent as statues. They wore simple work clothes, but there was something majestic about their posture, a dignity that transcended circumstance. The eldest, with grey hair tied in a tight bun, stepped forward. Her sisters remained motionless, flanking her like sentinels. "You must be the new owner," the woman said in a firm voice, with no trace of submission or fear. "We are the daughters of Samuel Morrison, the man who built this farm with his own hands." Billy took off his hat, feeling cold sweat run down his back, despite the cool surroundings of the barn. There was something in the eyes of those women that he couldn't decipher, an intensity that made him question if he really owned that place. "My name is Billy," he replied, his voice coming out quieter than he intended. "I bought the property legally. I have the documents." The woman tilted her head slightly, a gesture that could be interpreted as nodding or disdaining. "We know. The lawyer informed us about the sale." She paused, her eyes scouring Billy from head to toe as if she were sizing him up. "But there are things that are not in the documents, Mr. Billy. Things that money cannot buy or papers can transfer." And the other two women moved almost imperceptibly, closing a semicircle around Billy. It wasn't an overt threat, but something in the dynamics of that movement made his survival instincts skyrocket. He had faced armed men with more tranquility than he felt at that moment. "Our family has been buried in this land for 3 generations, the older woman continued. "Our blood watered every acre. Our sweat built every fence. Dad died defending this farm from cattle thieves and speculators. We're not just going to leave because someone showed up with money." Billy swallowed, his hand instinctively moving towards the holstered revolver. But something in the eyes of those women made him stop. It was not a challenge that he saw there, but a kind of deep pain, a suffering that had crystallized into determination. "I'm not asking you to leave," Billy said cautiously. "This is a big farm. There is room for all of us." The answer came as an echo of all three voices at once, charged with a certainty that chilled Billy's blood. "You now belong to us." The words echoed in the barn like a decree set in stone. Billy felt the weight of that statement settle on his shoulders like a heavy blanket in the desert heat. He had faced gunmen and bank robbers, but he had never felt so disarmed as he did at that moment in front of the 3 women who seemed to have sprouted from the earth itself. The youngest of the 3, with brown hair that glowed even in the dim light of the barn, took a sidestep, discreetly blocking the exit. It wasn't a threatening move in the conventional sense, but Billy realized the strategy from the experience of someone who had survived too long in the Wild West. They had done that before. "My name is Ruth," the older woman said, her voice cutting through the silence like a sharp knife. "These are my sisters, Sarah and Mary. We have been taking care of this farm since Dad got sick, and we continue to take care of it after he left for eternal rest." She pointed to the tools arranged on the walls. "Every hammer, every shovel, every piece of iron you see here has been put in place by our hands." Billy looked around the barn with fresh eyes. The organization was not only functional, it was almost ritual. The tools hung in order of size. The ropes were wound with military precision, and even the arrangement of the hay bales followed a pattern that suggested years of refined practice. It was not the work of 3 women maintaining a property. It was the work of 3 guardians guarding a shrine. "You guys did a good job," Billy admitted, trying to keep his voice steady. "But now I'm the legal owner. We can work together, but the final decisions are mine." Sarah, the middle one, with steel-colored eyes that seemed to penetrate the soul, laughed softly. It was not a joyful sound, but something loaded with bitter knowledge. "Legal owner," he repeated, savoring the words as if they were absurd. Dad was also a legal owner when speculators showed up offering money for the land. He was also a legal owner when the cattle rustlers came for our animals. "And where did that take him?" added Mary, the youngest, her soft voice contrasting with the harshness of her words. "He took him to a shallow grave in the city cemetery, while the men who killed him continued to drink whiskey in the hall." Billy felt a shiver run down his spine. There was something about the way they talked about their father's death that suggested intimate knowledge of the details. "How did Samuel die exactly?" he asked, though a part of him did not want to know the answer. Ruth walked to one of the barn's windows, her silhouette jagged against the light filtering through the planks. "3 men came here on a new moon night. They said they had a proposal for Dad, an offer he couldn't refuse." She turned slowly, her eyes shining with an intensity that made Billy take a step back. "Dad received them in this very barn. He was hospitable, offered water and food." Sarah continued the narrative as if it were a rehearsed ritual. "They waited for Dad to get comfortable, to let his guard down. Then they showed their true intentions." His hand instinctively moved to a scar on his arm, an old cut that had left a white mark on his tanned skin. "Dad fought. We always knew I would fight. And we watched from above," Mary said, pointing to the barn's attic. "We saw every moment. We hear every word. We have learned what kind of men there are in this world." The silence that followed was heavy as molten lead. Billy could hear his own heart beating, the sound echoing in the confined space of the barn. He began to understand that he had not just bought a farm, but had become part of a story that was far from over. "And what happened to these 3 men?" asked Billy, though he suspected he already knew the answer. The 3 women exchanged meaningful glances, a silent communication that spoke of shared secrets and precisely executed plans. Ruth turned her attention to Billy, a cold smile playing at the corners of her mouth. "They departed for eternal rest too," she said simply, "but not in the city cemetery. Some men don't deserve tombstones or prayers." Billy felt the cold sweat run down his back. He was beginning to realize that he had bought more than land and buildings. He had bought a place where justice followed rules very different from those written in the law books. "You killed them," Billy said. It wasn't a question. "We did justice," Sarah corrected. "There's a difference." Mary approached Billy, her steps silent like those of a predator. "The question now, Mr. Billy, is what kind of man are you? Are you one of those who come here with papers and promises, or are you someone who understands that this land has its own laws?" Billy looked at the 3 women, realizing that he was at a decisive moment. The farm he had bought came with more than he had bargained for, and Samuel Morrison's 3 daughters were not just unwilling occupants. They were the real ladies of that place, and he had to decide whether he would be his partner or his next victim. Night came to the Morrison farm like a silent predator, enveloping the property in a darkness that seemed denser than usual. Billy had spent the rest of the day exploring the land that was now officially his, but each step convinced him more that the true owners of that place had never left. His footprints mingled with those of other men on dry land, marks that told stories he preferred not to decipher. The main house revealed disturbing secrets when Billy finally got the courage to explore it. The rooms were too clean, arranged with a precision that suggested constant preparation for visits. But it was the smaller details that made his blood run cold. Ropes cut into uniform pieces stored in drawers, a shovel of fresh dirt still clinging to the metal hidden under the bed, and dark stains on the floor of the room that someone had desperately tried to clean up. The three women had disappeared after meeting in the barn, but Billy knew they were nearby. He could feel eyes on him as he walked around the property, a familiar feeling of being hunted that made the hairs on his arms stand on end. They studied him, evaluated every movement, every reaction, deciding what kind of man he really was. When the sun had completely set, Billy noticed a faint light coming from the barn. It was not the yellow light of an ordinary lamp, but something more subtle, almost ghostly. His windows on the second floor of the house offered a perfect view of the red building, and he could see shadows moving inside with definite purpose. Curiosity overcame fear. Billy descended the creaking stairs of the house, each step announcing his presence in the silent night. The desert night air was cold against his skin, a striking contrast to the sweltering heat of the day. Stars shone with cruel intensity in the cloudless sky, silent witnesses of all that happened in that isolated land. As he approached the barn, Billy could hear low sounds coming from inside. They were not voices, but noises of work. Wood being moved, earth being excavated, metal scraping against stone. It was the sound of people who knew exactly what they were doing, who had done it before and would do it again if necessary. A crack in the side wall of the barn offered a limited view of the interior. Billy glued his eye to the opening and felt his stomach turn at what he saw. The three women worked in absolute silence, moving floorboards with the efficiency of experienced carpenters. Under the planks, the earth had been excavated in a rectangular shape, creating a perfect pit for a grown man. Ruth held a lamp while Sarah and Mary checked the dimensions of the grave with marked ropes. There was no urgency in their movements, just the patience of artisans performing a craft mastered through practice. They had done it before, probably more times than Billy had imagined. A pile of lime was laid out next to the grave, along with bags of fresh soil that would be used to cover any evidence. The tools were arranged with surgical precision, shovels for digging, ropes for tying, knives for cutting. It was an operation planned down to the smallest detail, carried out by women who had ritually turned murder. Billy pulled away from the crack, his heart beating so hard that he feared they might hear him. He began to understand the true nature of the agreement he had made by buying that farm. Not only was he the owner of the land, but he had become part of a cycle of violence that repeated itself whenever unwanted men showed up with legal papers and dubious intentions. He returned to the house with silent steps, but he knew that his movement had been noticed. One of the barn's windows offered a direct view of the main house, and he could feel eyes following his every step through the darkness. They knew he had seen their preparations, and that was part of the plan. In the relative safety of the house, Billy checked his weapons, a Colt revolver in the holster and a Winchester rifle in the corner of the room. But weapons would not be enough against adversaries who knew every inch of that territory, who had turned the farm itself into an elaborate trap. They had the advantage of terrain, experience, and the patience of predators who knew how to wait for the right moment. The sound of footsteps on the porch of the house came like a death sentence. They weren't hurried or stealthy steps, but confident walks of people who knew exactly where they were going and what they would find when they got there. The planks of the porch creaked under the weight of 3 pairs of women's boots approaching the main door. Billy turned off the lamp in his room and positioned himself behind a window that offered a side view of the house. He could see the three silhouettes in the darkness, Ruth in front, Sarah and Mary flanking the entrance like experienced soldiers. They carried tools that could be used for both work and war. The door handle turned slowly. Billy had locked the entrance, but the sound he heard was of someone using a key. Of course they had keys. That had always been their home, and he was just the latest unwanted visitor who needed to be dealt with according to Morrison family traditions. Billy realized there were only two options: fight a battle he was likely to lose, or find a way to become part of the system the three women had created on that isolated farm. The choice he would make over the next few minutes would determine whether he would see another dawn or join the other men buried in the dark corners of that barn. The door opened like the mouth of a tomb, revealing the three silhouettes silhouetted against the darkness of the night. Billy stood motionless behind the second-floor window, watching the women enter his house with the familiarity of someone who had done it countless times. Their movements were coordinated like those of a pack, each occupying a strategic position that blocked all escape routes. Ruth lit a lamp in the main room, the yellow light dancing on the walls and creating shadows that seemed to move with a life of their own. Billy could clearly see the older woman's face now, and there was a disturbing serenity to her expression. It was the calm of someone who was at home, performing a well-rehearsed routine. Sarah climbed the stairs with measured steps, testing each step before putting on her full body weight. She knew exactly which planks creaked and how to avoid them. Billy heard her footsteps approaching the second-floor hallway, but the sound stopped abruptly in front of her bedroom door. She knew he was there, could feel his presence through the thin wood. Mary remained in the main room, positioning herself so that she could see both the stairs and the back door. In his hands, a rope had been wound with professional precision, ready to be used when needed. His eyes scanned the room with the attention of someone who memorized every detail, every possible hiding place or improvised weapon. Billy realized that he had severely underestimated the situation. These were not just three women defending their ancestral property. They were trained predators who had turned this farm into a death trap for men like him. Every room in the house had been prepared to facilitate capture, every piece of furniture positioned to limit escape movements. The silence in the house became oppressive. Billy could hear his own breath as if it were a roar, every heartbeat echoing in his ears like war drums. She knew that any move she made would be immediately detected by the three women who had turned hunting into a fine art. Sarah finally moved down the hallway, but not toward Billy's room. Instead, his footsteps directed to another room, where Billy heard the sound of heavy furniture being dragged. She was blocking windows, sealing escape routes, turning the house into a prison from which there would be no escape. Ruth began to examine the belongings Billy had left in the main room. His hands scoured the luggage with meticulous care, not looking for valuables, but studying clues about the kind of man he was. Each item was analyzed and categorized, information that would be used to determine its final destination. Billy noticed something disturbing about the women's movements. There was no rush in their actions. They knew he had nowhere to go, that the farm was too isolated for anyone to hear screams. They could work patiently, execute their plans with the precision of surgeons, ensure that they would not leave evidence to be discovered later. Mary approached the stairs, but did not climb. Instead, she positioned herself at the foot of the steps like a sentry, ensuring that Billy could not descend undetected. In his hands, beyond the rope, Billy could see the metallic glow of a knife with a long, sharp blade. It was not a kitchen tool, but a weapon specifically designed to kill. The sound of more furniture being moved came from downstairs. Ruth had begun to prepare the room for what was to come, creating a space where dirty work could be done without leaving permanent stains on the floor. Billy realized that they had made these preparations so many times that it had become an automatic routine. Sarah returned to the hallway, and this time her footsteps headed directly to Billy's room. There was no more subterfuge in his movements, just the confidence of someone who knew his prey had nowhere to run. The handle turned slowly, but the door didn't open immediately. Sarah was savoring the moment, prolonging the fear she knew Billy was feeling. Billy looked around the room, looking for alternatives. The window offered a 6-meter drop to the hard floor of the courtyard, but it was the only escape route left. His luggage was in the main room, including extra ammunition for the revolver. He would have to rely only on the 6 bullets in the drum, and the hope that he would be able to survive long enough to reach the horse tied up in the yard. The bedroom door opened wide open, revealing Sarah standing on the threshold like an angel of death. She carried no visible weapons, but there was something in her eyes that was more terrifying than any revolver. It was the expression of someone who had killed before and felt no remorse for what he was about to do. Billy knew that the next few seconds would determine whether he would live to see another day. The 3 women had orchestrated this situation with military precision, but he still had an advantage. They expected him to act like the other men who had passed by. They expected fear, paralysis, desperate pleas for mercy. Instead, Billy made the only decision that could surprise them. He jumped out of the window. The impact with the hard floor of the courtyard sent ripples of pain through Billy's bones, but the adrenaline kept him moving. He rolled on dry land and stood up quickly, ignoring the sharp twinge in his left ankle. Behind him, he could hear quiet voices coming from the house, not cries of surprise, but precise instructions being given by women who had faced escape attempts before. His horse remained tied to the post, but the distance to him seemed greater in the darkness. Billy ran with everything he had, expecting at any moment to feel the impact of a knife in his back or hear the sound of a gunshot. But the sound that reached him was different. The noise of doors being opened calmly, measured footsteps coming down the balcony stairs. They weren't in a hurry. Billy mounted the horse in a single fluid motion, spurring the animal before he was even fully settled into the saddle. The horse darted toward the farm's main gate, hooves kicking up clouds of dust on the windless night. But when he looked back, he saw something that chilled his blood. The 3 women stood on the porch of the house, watching their escape with disturbing serenity. Ruth raised her hand in a gesture that could be interpreted as farewell or blessing. There was no anger on his face, just an infinite patience that spoke of absolute certainty. They knew something that Billy hadn't yet understood. The main gate of the farm was open. Billy passed him without slowing down, but that detail planted a seed of doubt in his mind. Why would they leave the gate open if they wanted to keep him prisoner? Why didn't they persecute him when they clearly had the means to do so? The answer came when Billy reached the main road. His belongings, all his luggage, including money and legal documents, remained on the farm. Without them, he was just another aimless bum in the Wild West. Worse, the only documents proving their ownership of the Morrison farm were now in the hands of Ruth, Sarah, and Mary. Billy pulled the reins on his horse, stopping in the middle of the dusty road. In the distance, he could see the lights of the farm shining like eyes in the darkness. He began to understand the true genius of the 3 women's plan. They didn't have to kill him immediately. They could simply wait for reality to force him back. Without documents, he could not prove ownership of the land. Without money, he could not buy a ticket far from there. Without luggage, I didn't even have extra clothes for the trip. The Morrison women had created a trap that depended not on walls or chains, but on their own need for survival. Billy looked up at the night sky, where stars shone indifferent to the human drama unfolding below. He could continue riding, abandon everything, and start again in some distant city. Or she could accept the reality that the 3 women had created, that this farm had its own rules, and anyone who wanted to stay there would have to learn to live by them. The night wind carried the distant sound of a door closing on the farm. Ruth, Sarah, and Mary had gone back inside the house, probably to wait. They knew Billy would come back, because men like him always came back. The land had a way of calling its owners back, even when they tried to flee. Billy dismounted from his horse and sat on the side of the road, watching the lights of the Morrison farm flicker in the distance. For the first time since he had arrived at that place, he began to understand what the three women really meant. He was not the owner of that land. She was the one who owned it now, and when the sun came up, Billy would know he would have to go back. Not because women would force him, but because there was nowhere else in the world where he really belonged. The Morrison farm had become his prison and his destination, and Samuel Morrison's three daughters were both his guardians and his mistresses. The cycle would go on, as it always had in that isolated patch of the Wild West, where justice followed laws older than any legal document, and where three women kept eternal vigil over the land their father had watered with blood. If this story of quiet revenge and ancient justice has awakened something within you, you can't miss the next dark Wild West narratives we have prepared. Subscribe to the channel and activate the bell so you don't miss any of these journeys where the land takes its own toll and where men discover that they are not always the predators they imagined themselves to be.